Oops.
Hello, and I think we're a little bit early here. I'm gonna stop that.
Yeah, I did not mean to do that. I thought it was asking me to share my screen.
Yeah, there's nobody in yet either. So
Yeah.
let me see if I can stop. Today, my name is Paul Bemis, and I'm the president-elect of the Granite State ASHRAE organization. Today, we're going to be doing a webinar on solar energy in New Hampshire and some of the issues and policy issues facing it. This is a joint presentation between Clean Energy New Hampshire and Granite State ASHRAE. We share many goals, our two organizations, with respect to trying to reduce greenhouse gases and trying to become more energy efficient with respect to our buildings and how they're heated and cooled. Solar energy, therefore, is very important to us in terms of its ability to help drive these two components down in terms of cost and get our greenhouse gases down and get our energy costs down. So today we're going to be talking about solar energy in New Hampshire. There's been a new report come out, and I'm thrilled to have with me Madeline Mino. Madeline is the executive director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. She has a background in policy and has been with the organization a couple of years now. I know Madeline from her work she did on hydro when she was with the city of Nashua, so I've known her for some time. She is a very solid person with respect to knowledge and policy and working this issue very hard from the inside, working together with Clean Energy New Hampshire. She has her PhD from Idaho State University and has a background in biology and environmental policy. Welcome to our program today, Madeline.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Now, with respect to a few organizing things first here before we get started, this is a GoToWebinar session. You are all in listen-only mode. We do that to try to make this a little better with respect to information flow. We also are doing this without cameras on today, simply so that it keeps your attention focused on the material and not the books on our shelf in the background, which is what I always look at whenever I see someone working from their home office environment. We all are still working from our home offices, so bear with us on that. With respect to questions, you can type questions in. There is a questions panel in your little GoToWebinar session over on the right. Feel free to ask questions as we go. We'll have to type them in, and I will be monitoring that panel, and I will bring them up. We'll try to answer your questions in real time if we can, so don't be afraid to ask questions as we go, and I will find a spot to ask them to Madeline. So with that, Madeline, welcome to our program today. Thank you for being with us, and take it away.
Thanks so much for having me today. As Paul mentioned, I'm the executive director of Clean Energy New Hampshire, and if you're not familiar with our organization, we are a nonprofit based right here in Concord, New Hampshire. And we work on policy, education, and advocacy for all things related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, clean tech. We work a lot with local groups, such as energy committees, municipal staff, working more on the education and technical assistance side of our work. We have a focus initiative in the North Country as well. We do quite a bit of policy and advocacy work, both at the State House as well as the Public Utilities Commission. And we work on many issues. You know, we don't just work on sort of renewable energy generation. We work a lot on things that are very relevant to ASHRAE members, including building code updates, working a lot on decarbonizing the building sector. And we also are working more and more on clean transportation through our Drive Electric New Hampshire group. So with all that said, I'm here to talk to you mostly about solar energy in New Hampshire, but I'll touch a little bit on some other interesting policy topics. Working on trying to advance my slides, but it is not going. So let me.
It should allow a down arrow or even a space bar should advance it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do, but let me just.
I think it is in screen show mode, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to show this. Uh-oh. Perhaps my screen is frozen. We practiced this before and it worked wonderfully, of course.
Let me, yeah, I can see your screen.
There we go.
There you go.
So first we'll start about what is the current status of solar energy in New Hampshire. And here on this slide, I'm showing ISO New England's projected and current solar deployment in New Hampshire and the other New England states. So ISO New England is the grid operator for the entire New England energy electric grid. And so they more and more have been having to take into account how much especially distributed solar is deployed on the grid in various locations, because they have to take that into account into their forecasts. The grid operator tries to make sure that the lights stay on, so they have to have very sophisticated forecasts the day ahead for exactly how much electricity is going to be needed on the grid where at different times of day. If you've ever seen the ISO New England dashboard, they show the projected curve, which, you know, there's lower demand at night while everybody's sleeping, and then it usually ramps up in the morning. There's a dip during the day, and then it ramps back up. And the highest demand is usually late afternoon, early evening, when there's both still some electricity demand at our workplaces that hasn't completely wrapped up, but people are also getting home and turning on the lights and starting to make dinner at home. So they are projecting the deployment of solar energy in all the states so that they can take that into account into their forecasts. So you may notice that through 2019, we don't have the 2020 numbers yet. Through 2019, except for Maine, New Hampshire had the least amount of solar energy deployed in New England. Maine had some recent policy changes due to change in their administration there, and Maine is currently undergoing a solar energy boom. And so you can also see that there's projected to be big growth in Maine over the next few years, shown here. So New Hampshire is projected to have pretty moderate solar growth, so that by the end of the decade, New Hampshire would have the least amount of solar deployed in New England. And so that is because these forecasts are based on existing policies. So I'm going to describe the sort of the fundamental policies in New Hampshire. My slides are not advancing again.
It must have something to do with the GoToWebinar thing.
Maybe. I will. So, oh, you're stuck here. There we go. The enabling policies in New Hampshire for the deployment of renewable energy in general, but solar especially, because it is one of the fastest growing renewable energies. First is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So there are many, many states across the country that have adopted renewable portfolio standards. And it is a policy that states that the state of New Hampshire has a goal to have at least 25% of the energy supplied to customers in New Hampshire to be renewable by 2025. So that's our goal. It is a complex market of a commodity called renewable energy certificates. So if you have a solar array on your roof, you may have registered to sell what people call their RECs, renewable energy certificates. And that is the commodity, the attribute that says you have generated renewable energy. And you can hold on to those, and those are the environmental value of your renewable energy, or you can sell those. So it's not just the utilities that have obligations under a renewable portfolio standard, any energy supplier. So a lot of businesses now use competitive energy suppliers. So proportionate to the amount of energy they supply in the state, they have a relative obligation to demonstrate that a certain amount of the energy they supply is renewable. And it's a little more complicated than that. It has to be renewable in a certain distribution of types. So we have 4 classes in New Hampshire. Class 4 is existing small hydro. Class 3 is existing biomass electric. Class 2 is new solar. And class 1 is new renewables, includes other technologies, but if there's new hydro or biomass, they fall into that class 1. New Hampshire also has thermal energy included in our renewable portfolio standard. A lot of states' renewable portfolio standards are criticized for being renewable electricity standards only, not really renewable energy. So because there's a recognition that how we heat our buildings and the building sector is a big factor in greenhouse gas emissions, we have included renewable thermal energy in our portfolio standard. There's a feedback if energy suppliers cannot procure enough renewable energy certificates in a certain class, or if they simply don't want to, they have the option of making what's called an alternative compliance payment. Those payments go into a fund called the Renewable Energy Fund that's administered by the Sustainable Energy Division of the Public Utilities Commission. And that fund then funds a suite of rebate and grant programs. So there are rebate programs for both residential and commercial industrial solar. There are rebate programs for both residential and commercial industrial wood pellet, centralized wood pellet heating systems. There's a low moderate income community solar grant program, and then there's also a competitive grant program.
Quick question here, Madeline, about batteries. Is battery included in any of the types? I doubt it is, correct? It's not a generation.
No, it's not included in the renewable portfolio standard, and we currently do not have a state policy that dictates a specific amount or goal of energy storage deployment. There are other states that have such policies. It's not something that we have currently in New Hampshire. It certainly has been discussed. There have been some discussions and some bills previously that have looked at that, but that hasn't gone through yet. So how does our renewable portfolio standard compare to other states in New England? Well, just like the deployment of solar, we're very much lagging behind. We are aiming, as I said, to get to 25% total by 2025, but this is showing the new renewables. So it's not accounting for the existing resources we're looking to support. And we can see that all the other New England states are aiming to get to much higher deployment of new renewable energy resources in their renewable portfolio standards. Having to go out of my, and why that matters is, again, the deployment is factored into the amount of energy that we are going to need. So this is the whole forecast from ISO New England from how much energy is going to be needed to supply our needs into the future. And so the orange line is if we were doing nothing related to energy efficiency and we were not deploying any new solar. So the yellow line is the gross projected load minus the anticipated amount of behind the meter solar. And then the green line is the solar paired with expected improvements in energy efficiency. So
Question here on this slide, Madeline, is this New England or just New Hampshire?
This is all of New England.
Yeah.
So they do have this as a breakdown for, or they have, some individual state forecasts, but yeah, this is all of New England. Mm-hmm. So without energy efficiency in solar, we would see increases in the amount of energy that would be needed to supply to meet our needs. But with both investments in efficiency and behind the meter solar, we see that, quite flat over the next decade. That means that we can meet our needs with existing resources. We're not going to have hopefully too much investment in new large scale generation or massive transmission investments. It also lowers the cost of electricity for everyone when we can especially keep what's called peak demand low. And I'll get more into that later when I talk about the results of our report. Another important enabling policy that you likely have heard about is net metering. So we do have net metering here in New Hampshire. Net metering is a billing mechanism that credits eligible customer generators for the electricity they do not use in real time and discharge to the electric grid. In the media, net metering is often explained as selling your energy to the grid, and that is an oversimplification. You do not sort of simply become like a generator and sell your energy to the utility. It really is a bill credit that you can obtain. And we'll get into group net metering next. So the eligibility, you have to be a customer of the 3 regulated utilities to be eligible for this specific credit. So that's Eversource, Unitil, and Liberty. The New Hampshire Electric Co-op has a net metering program but they set their own rules and their own credit rate. Same for some of the municipal utilities. Municipal utilities are quite rare in New Hampshire, but we do have a handful, including Wolfboro, for example. The credit value is shown in this table. So the credit value is when you export a unit of energy, so a kilowatt hour, for example, the credit that you get on your bill. There are 2 classes of systems. There's small systems up to 100 kilowatt in capacity, and then there's large systems up to 1 megawatt in capacity. If your renewable energy system is over a megawatt in capacity, you're not eligible to participate in net metering at all. So the smaller systems get credit for the energy charge, the transmission charge, and 25% of the distribution charge. You are not credited for your fixed customer charge, your non-bypassable charges. And so those are things like stranded cost charge, system benefits charge, or if you're a commercial industrial customer, you also don't get a credit on your demand charge. So these are all different charges if you start to look at your utility bill that you're charged for. So you are not getting what's called full retail credit for the energy you export. So the energy you export is worth less than the energy you import into your home. If you're a large system over 100 kilowatt, but under up to 1 megawatt, you are only credited for the energy charge. So these days, default service for the utility rate is the energy charge. It changes every 6 months according to their procurement. And it's been going down recently. It can be as low as 6 cents a kilowatt hour. It's been as high as 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour in recent years. So it does vary from time to time.
Now, Madeline, I sort of have to just jump in here and say this right here is unique to our state, correct? I mean, other states are making this more attractive, and these rules that you're referring to right here are unique to us. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So New Hampshire's net metering credit is considered to be quite conservative. So there are a lot of states, especially those smaller systems, are still getting what's called full retail credit. So the energy you export is worth the same than the energy you import. You would get a credit equal to what you would pay for it. And for those large systems as well, not getting any credit for transmission or distribution is also a lot less than what other states compensate net metering at. And then another way that the economics of solar is challenging in New Hampshire is the value of renewable energy certificates. So that's another value for the energy you produce from a renewable system And in other states, those RECs are worth many times what a REC in New Hampshire is worth. So a solar REC in New Hampshire has sold for as little as $5 in recent years per megawatt and per megawatt hour. In Massachusetts, just over the border, SRECs have been worth $200 a megawatt. It's the same commodity, but there's an incredible difference in the value that's placed on it.
And the people determining these rules and what these values are the PUC and legislators?
Yes, this current model of net metering credit was determined at the Public Utilities Commission in a docket that we participated in that happened in 2016, 2017. And there's ongoing work to do some studies, and there likely will be, these rates will be revisited probably in another year or two when some of these studies are completed. But the legislature also has a say, obviously, in the underlying laws. What the eligibility criteria are is definitely set by the law, and how big of a system can participate. You know, we've been involved in a policy debate at the State House for quite a few years now about allowing larger systems to also participate in net metering. And that's talking about that 1 megawatt limit. All right. So I was talking about regular net metering. There is also group net metering. Other states call this virtual net metering. And that's when you have a renewable generator that may not have a lot of load or electricity demand on site. And the goal is to either entirely or in part supply electricity for a group of members. So you can think about this, a lot of towns are interested in doing this, and this is what's fueling a lot of the debate around allowing net metering over a megawatt. So a town, so I live in Concord, for example. Concord has been considering for quite a while to put large solar arrays at the landfill, the wastewater treatment plant, and the water treatment plant. And those would be bigger than what is needed to supply the electricity needed at any of those locations. And the goal is to virtually share the credits generated by net metering with other accounts. So they could group net meter those solar arrays with City Hall, with some of our public schools, with you know, the town and rec office, all sorts of other city installations. So the way that that works is that the electricity is exported from the generator, flows through the utilities distribution system to the group members. The group members continue to pay their full bill to the utility. The utility credits the generator only for the energy portion of the bill, because we explained that for larger generators, that's the net metering credit. The way that group net metering has worked historically here in New Hampshire, the group host may be using a broker, and then according to a contract, they then give a discount to their group members. If the generator and all the members are owned by the same entity, like I said, in a city or a town, they obviously are not going to need a broker because they're managing all these accounts themselves, and they're going to be using some of the credit payment to offset the bills for the group members that they're still paying to the utility. We just last year also changed, there's another option where the group host can ask the utility to directly credit the group members' accounts based on the value of the net metering credit.
Now, I personally am going through this in my own little town here. I'm the chairman of our energy committee here in my little town, and we've just had to back away from group net metering because it wasn't economically viable. Again, we're going to have to go to behind the meter, make a smaller array, because the economics studied by, in fact, an independent third party of using group net metering to power the rest of our buildings, which is essentially an economic program where they're giving you credit, is not sufficient for us to go forward with a bigger array. So we've had to size the thing down so that we can only be behind the meter for the wastewater treatment facility and not do group net metering to the rest of the building. See, the policy is discouraging us from having a bigger array, as it is, I'm sure, you in Concord.
Yep. So if you look at all the charges that the group members are paying, the energy transmission, distribution, non-bypassable, for a town, you'd be paying demand charges, customer charges, but then the credit is only the energy part of the bill. That's maybe roughly half the credit is equal to roughly half the payments you have to make.
Yeah,
And
53%
so that's
in our
why,
case.
yeah,
Yes, that's
exactly.
right.
So
Mhm.
that's why the economics are not great. So you
Yeah.
have to really consider, it might have a long payback. It's still better than just paying your full bill, but there's still a big offset there. So a lot of the debate around expanding net metering is around the value of that credit. So we at Clean Energy New Hampshire work with some of our similar organization in another state, Renewable Energy Vermont, and a national organization called Vote Solar, to commission Synapse Energy Economics to do a report with some newly available data from ISO New England. So as I mentioned, ISO was doing these forecasts for how much behind the meter solar was generating throughout, in very detailed time intervals to be able to use that in their forecasts. And then they looked back over the last several years. So they made available last summer that data for 2014 through 2019. And then Synapse Energy Economics used that to look at how much behind the meter solar. So when I'm talking about behind the meter solar or local solar, we're talking about solar energy that does not participate in the wholesale market. So if there's a utility scale solar system, that's not being counted here. We're talking about the smaller installations. In New Hampshire, what we currently have is all considered behind the meter solar. So what Synapse did is to look at how much lower demand was in the wholesale markets because of behind the meter solar. So especially during times of peak demand, that has a very significant effect on the price in the wholesale market. So the price of electricity varies in real-time manner depending on how much electricity is needed and depending on the availability of fuels for different forms of energy. So generally in New England, our electricity prices get very high in the summer during heat waves because everybody's cranking up their air conditioning. So we're using a lot of electricity. And in the winter during cold snaps, because a lot of natural gas that would otherwise go to electricity generation, which is our primary form of electricity generation in New England, is diverted to heating buildings because it's so cold. So because a lot of there's more demand for natural gas for heating and electricity, it makes the price of electricity go up because the real-time cost of natural gas for those generators is going up. So then other more expensive forms of generation are then having to be turned on to supply the electricity needed. If you all live around here, the Bow coal plant, for example, is what's operated now as a peaker plant. So it only turns on during these times of peak demand. It pretty much only turns on when it's really, really hot or really, really cold. So the price suppression effect of behind the meter solar is what Synapse looked at over those 5 years. And they found that over the 5 years, solar energy provided $1.1 billion throughout New England. Of that value, 83 million was from New Hampshire. So these are cost savings that are passed on to ratepayers through electricity charges. And that's just the wholesale market value that was saved. That there's obviously very large environmental benefits All of that solar energy generated over 5 years cut 4.6 million metric tons of CO2 pollution. And yeah, it was all hourly data that they considered over those 5 years.
Now, the big savings here, and I've seen these studies come out of Vermont as well, because Green Mountain Power did this study where they were using batteries, as you're well aware, and they were using Tesla batteries and offsetting. The big savings comes from this peak situation, right, where the cost of electricity surges in times of peak. And if you have solar on, or in their case, if you used batteries, you get to avoid those having to purchase from those peak plants. You get to effectively offset with your solar and save a tremendous amount of money. The other point that I found here is that it also delays the need to upgrade the infrastructure, which is an expensive thing, making bigger wires, bigger cables, everything to handle those peaks. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's those peak demand events where with increasing demand, the unit price of electricity goes up in the wholesale market. And so any additional unit of electricity demand continues to increase that per unit price. And so you could lower it by doing demand response, by dispatching a fleet of batteries like Green Mountain Power does, and also save from this behind the meter solar generation, because if your house is using entirely the energy generated in real time from your solar system, you're not drawing from the grid. And so absent your solar system, there would be additional demand in the wholesale market, and therefore the unit price of electricity would have been even higher. And so those are the savings that are being calculated here. A little bit more New Hampshire specific data here. We're looking at some of the New England numbers again, but the local solar produced in New Hampshire just in 2019, which was the most recent year that the data was available, generated 52 million kilowatt hours of electricity, which was equal to about 0.5% of the state's electricity used in that year. Local solar powered the equivalent of 7,000 homes. That doesn't necessarily mean that 7,000 houses in New Hampshire have solar, because some of those are on businesses or municipal buildings. And just in New Hampshire, there was about $3 million of CO2 avoided benefits. So what we're really interested in is, how does this all add up to the value of solar energy, which could be translated in informing net metering credits, for example. So the energy value is not all there is. So they really focused on that avoided energy value. We can start to translate that into value for kilowatt hours produced by a solar system. And so they calculated that when you parse out that $1.1 billion in kilowatt hour of solar energy produced, that's equal to 11.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's just the energy benefit of avoiding to have to add that demand into the wholesale market. There are other commodities. So ISO New England also pays electricity generators for something called capacity. It pays the generators for existing and being at the ready to generate when needed. And so distributed energy resources don't participate in the capacity market because they're not dispatchable by the system operator. They sort of generate at will. But because they exist, ISO New England has to procure less capacity. And so again, because there's less demand in that market, there's a suppression in the cost. So that's calculated to be about 1.6 cents of value per kilowatt hour generated of solar. And then there is, you can start looking at environmental value. So here in New Hampshire, that can be a little bit more controversial, and there's also different values that are put on avoided CO2, depending on what's considered and what's being valued and the methodology used. So even if we don't want to consider the environmental value at all, we're looking at a much higher value than what we currently credit net metered facilities here in New Hampshire. So, we're at 13.5 cents. And we were saying that only the energy cost is, 6 to 9 cents. It varies. So this is what we're hoping to continue to add this information to the dialogue, to start to talk about what should be the true fair compensation for distributed solar in New Hampshire.
So essentially here, what you have, Madeline, this is where you start to get into politics, I suppose, right? Because here, what we're suggesting is that the carbon dioxide contribution to the environment is, a certain dollar per megaton. That's essentially an opportunity cost in the sense that it's detrimental to our environment because it's carbon dioxide emission. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if we start to add in, the values shown at the bottom, 20 to 37 cents per kilowatt hour, then we're starting to take into account valuing the avoided environmental impact consequence of emitting additional carbon dioxide, of emitting NOx, SOx, particulate matter, and the effect, for example, particulate matter is very closely tied to the incidence of asthma. And so you can calculate, if you have less particulate matter emitted, how many hospital emergency room visits for asthma can be avoided. That's how you start valuing those attributes.
So if you're a climate denier, if you do not believe that humans are contributing to global greenhouse gas emission and temperature rise because of carbon emission, then you would not agree to these numbers, I would guess, right? And this lies the issue with the policy, correct?
Well, you may start arguing that we shouldn't value the avoidance of carbon dioxide at all.
Right.
The other criteria pollutants that are there are, they're real pollutants that,
right.
If you inhale more particulate matter, there are real health consequences. And so that's a little bit more immediate than a changing climate.
Right.
And what I was saying is that even if we decide not to even look at the environmental value, just the energy and capacity values, we're already saying solar energy is worth more than we are compensating it for under our net metering credits.
Yes, yes.
And then there's additional benefits that were not quantified in there, including potential for avoided transmission distribution capacity. That's what you were saying, like we might not have to upgrade our wires or upgrade some electrical equipment because we have electricity generated more spread out throughout the grid. There are local economic benefits, tax support, reliability benefits, participant savings, all those things. So
now, just from a cost to generate by itself, Madeline, solar at this point, PV, without any subsidies, without anything at all, is below natural gas in terms of dollars per kilowatt hour for generation. I think it's down around 6 cents or something, isn't it?
Yeah, the cost of generating solar has been going down precipitously. And of course, it depends the scale of the project.
Yes.
So some of our neighboring states have done clean energy procurements recently, where they encourage the utilities to put out a request for proposals for longer term contracts. And there's been extremely competitively priced renewable energy, including solar coming in at under 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Yep. In Maine recently. I think there was 3.8, 3.9. And so we've seen very competitively priced and much below standard fossil fuels.
So if a utility were to right now, without any incentives, economic incentives and so forth, were to go out and say, we're going to take $1 million and we're going to invest it in power generation, solar would be the lowest cost production that they could possibly do, I believe, correct?
Very likely, yes. It depends, on a lot of other things. The cost of interconnecting that resource, where they can put it, the land, solar is more land intensive than
Yes,
some
but we're
other
also in that
generation.
mix talking about future value of carbon fuel too. I mean,
Yep,
any other plant like a natural gas or coal would have a variable cost into the future of natural gas or coal. In case of
yep.
PV, you've got nothing except sunlight, so your variable costs are zero effectively, or very, very low compared to that other source.
Absolutely, yeah. Not having to factor in the variable price of fuel makes the projection of costs, it's a big capital investment at the start, and then you pretty much just generate mostly cost-free because there's very little operation and maintenance cost for solar compared to even other types of renewable generation.
Yep.
So I was going to shift a little bit to talk about some other important New Hampshire policy developments that I thought ASHRAE folks might be interested in. We've been working really hard as a priority on developing the next 3-year plan for our energy efficiency resource standard in New Hampshire. So we like to talk about solar, but before we think about renewable generation, we always encourage folks to really dive deep into efficiency, because you don't want to develop your solar system to be generating electricity if you're just going to be wasting it. So first, you should work on maximizing your efficiency, and then design a solar system to meet your efficient energy use would be the ideal way to do it. In New Hampshire, our energy efficiency resource standard is our statewide energy efficiency policy. It's implemented by our utilities under the NH Saves brand. You're probably all familiar with these programs. It's very important because, as it says here, 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming directly from the building sector, and we want to favor efficiency first. So the plan that was proposed after a long stakeholder process was more ambitious than the past 3 years plan. So we implement the energy efficiency resource standard in 3-year increments. 2020 was the last year of our first EERS plan, and we had been working on developing the programs from 2021 to 2023. The overall savings goals that were before the Public Utilities Commission was a 4.5% electric savings over the course of the plan and 2.8% natural gas savings. There is many more opportunities for heat pump conversions compared to the previous 3 years of programs. So you're probably all familiar with the heat pump rebate. There is more funding in those. I know historically they would run out of rebate funding partway through the year. That's becoming much more consistent with additional funding. But there's also a pilot program called energy optimization that's proposed, and that's specifically to enable fuel switching to efficient heat pumps with smart controls integrated. And so we're hoping that that will be approved. It's really starting to look at a mind shift to shift our efficiency programs away from simply saving kilowatt hours to saving overall energy. And so that's why it's called energy optimization. There was also quite a bit of funding and programming for workforce training in the programs. So this was supposed to all be wrapped up and approved by the Public Utilities Commission by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, we had hearings all the way to December 22nd, and then between Christmas and New Year's, the commission issued an order extending the existing 2020 programs and budgets for 8 weeks to give themselves more time to decide. There's a big coalition of stakeholders and the utilities all supporting these programs at the commission, and the only party that was not on board was the commission's staff itself. There was some concerns from public comments, especially from larger businesses that are concerned about the rate impacts of better funding the efficiency programs, even though every dollar spent in efficiency has to have a positive cost benefit associated with it. So this is something to look carefully at to see what the commission's decision will be for the next 3 years of our efficiency programs. And then, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work on legislative policy, and we're just getting started with the legislative session. And I'll just touch on a few bills that we've identified as our priority bills for this session. We have 4 priority to oppose bills and then 4 priority to support bills. Our priority to oppose bills include House Bill 213, which are really going after that renewable portfolio standard. It's rolling back our goals by about half. Instead of getting to 25% renewable by 2025, we would now only be aiming to look at 8.8%. And it's completely eliminating that thermal part of the standard as well as the biomass electric part of the standard. So certainly, as I showed, we're already way behind our goals compared to other New England states. We would like to be making progress and certainly not going backwards. House Bill 549 is really going after the energy efficiency resource standard, how we determine the plan and how whether or not the plan that's currently before the commission could be implemented. It's looking to put an immediate hold on implementing the new plan with more ambitious savings, increased budgets, and increased opportunities. And it would start a rulemaking process to start over to develop new energy savings goals that must be within the context of available and sustainable funding. So, we've been working really hard on developing the plan, and we certainly hope that the commission will be able to implement it and that it will not be undermined by the legislature. House Bill 225 would reset the net metering credit to wholesale. So as I mentioned, our net metering credit is already quite conservative. Wholesale would be to slash the credit by half again, at least. So if right now those larger systems are getting 7 cents a kilowatt hour of credit, they would now be getting 3 cents, 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour credit. And our major concern is that this wouldn't just be going forward, it would actually affect existing net metering systems.
Why are we going backwards? I mean, Madeline, I'm struggling here to understand, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, so I understand, but why are we going backwards instead of forwards on these things? It sort of makes no sense. What's the argument for going backwards?
So the argument is, and this is entirely frustrating to us, we do get frustrated of having the same conversations over and over again. The legislators that are proponents of this type of legislation, and I'll say this bill only has one sponsor, is that to them, an electron is an electron, and they think all electrons should be treated equal. So if, Seabrook Station participates in the wholesale market and gets the wholesale price, they think that all electricity generated should also be valued in that manner. Even though, as I mentioned, Seabrook Station or the Bow Coal Plant, they're getting capacity payments, which distributed solar doesn't. And there's a value in having smaller distributed generators spread out throughout the grid rather than these mega generators that do serve a purpose, but are also enjoying tremendous economies of scale. It's like the difference
not only
between
economies of scale, Madeline, but they're also enjoying tremendous tax benefits. I mean, the nuclear industry itself is subsidized by the federal government and takes on no risk whatsoever, as you well know. So
yeah, there's a huge difference between the traditional generators being almost entirely subsidized at the federal level,
right.
and renewable generators being, the drive for encouraging the deployment of renewable energy has come mostly at the state level. And so incentives like renewable portfolio standards and net metering have been developed at the state level. And so in a state like New Hampshire, that's incredibly fiscally conservative, and there's a strong libertarian streak where they don't necessarily like mandates, there is just always going to be opposition to policies like this.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do our best to explain the policies and the value, and to talk about, especially we talk a lot about the economic development benefits of generating our energy locally, of reinvesting our energy dollars within the New Hampshire economy. but it does not always find a receptive ear with everyone.
You know, there was this whole, you talk about economies of scale, and back when, you know, we talked about the nuclear power plant, to talk about Seabrook specifically in our own state, there was this thought that the economy of scale here was going to be so big that electricity be almost free. If you're not old enough to remember that, but I certainly am. I can remember governors telling us we're going to have free electricity because of the economy of scale associated with this kind of thing. But it never really turned out that way for a couple of reasons. One of which was, you talk about nuclear in general, they never really standardized on a design. They kept coming up, you know, each company who was delivering them to the market actually had a unique design, a different design, because they were competing against each other, and therefore the economy of scale essentially disappeared. There was no economy of scale due to replication, or that comes from replication of the design. The other part is that in the state that we're in, it's a monopoly. Why would anybody drop their prices when in fact there's really only one or two providers, and they've carved up the state into geographies, really, and they don't really have a lot of competition. I mean, a couple economic issues that are at play there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. The last bill, I'll try to leave it a few minutes for questions. So House Bill 315 would restrict what community power programs can do. So 2 years ago, New Hampshire passed a big overhaul of our community power programs. We don't have any in the state currently. There's a lot of potential there for communities to be able to procure energy more competitively for their residents and businesses, and to also be very innovative in procuring local renewable energy or doing some more advanced efficiency in their own programs. This would really aim to restrict that severely. And then it's not all doom and gloom. We are looking to support some bills, and that includes House Bill 106, and there's going to be a companion Senate bill that is looking at expanding the size of projects that can participate in net metering, but in a much more narrow way, just focused on towns and other public entities, so towns, schools, counties. We are assured that the governor does support this. It's a baby step forward compared to some of the previous net metering expansion bills, but we certainly want to make the progress we can. There's another bill that's still in LSR form, which is a legislative service request. It doesn't have a bill number yet, which is a renewable energy procurement bill from Senator Waters, mostly looking at offshore wind, but also some of the other renewable technologies. And then the other two are a little bit more technical fixes. Within our renewable portfolio standard, there's what we call REC sweeping, which is if you don't register your system to be eligible to sell your RECs, whether you sell them or not, they get credited for free to the utilities and other energy suppliers. And that's made worse by the fact that an inflated capacity factor is used in the calculation. So this would at least fix that, because our previous attempts to repeal the policy entirely has not been successful. And then Senate Bill 78 would change how that renewable energy fund is appropriated to the Public Utilities Commission to just help make those programs a little bit smoother to manage. There's been a lot of stop and starts in the programs, and there's also sort of big hiccups in the transition from one state fiscal year to the other, and so it's trying to smooth that over a little bit. So that's everything I have, and I'm happy to take any questions anybody might have.
Yeah, I've been answering a few of them as we go along over here in my other display. One of them came up, who is on the commission? I think here we're talking about the commission that's setting some of these policies, probably PUC, I suspect.
Sure, yeah, so the Public Utilities Commission typically has 3 commissioners. We're currently down to 2. So there are usually 3 commissioners that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Executive Council. And so those commissioners are the ultimate deciders of the issues that go to the PUC. And there's currently Chairwoman Diane Martin and Commissioner Bailey. And there's one commissioner who resigned from his post and hasn't been replaced yet. So there's an open empty seat. So we're looking to see who might get nominated for that. That's an issue that we'll be following closely.
Mm-hmm. There was a question here about how is the fact that solar generation is not dispatchable accounted for in its value? I asked Gary what he meant by that. I'm not exactly sure what he means by dispatchable.
Yeah, so dispatchable electricity is something that can be called on demand. So
Right.
if you're a natural gas generator and I say, I need you now, you can turn on.
Mhm.
Different technologies have different ramp rates. So how quickly they can respond is what's called their ramp rate. But they are considered dispatchable because I can say, I need you now, and you can turn on and supply the electricity I need. Solar is not that way, right? Because if I say, I need you now, but it's super cloudy, you're maybe not going to be able to generate, or at least not generate as much as your full potential. So a lot of renewable technologies are non-dispatchable, and that's why they're not considered base load. So
Right.
base load power is power that can generate all the time.
Yeah.
You know, that's the case for wind energy, not as much for offshore wind because the winds are much more consistent offshore. But certainly, so if a solar generator does participate in the capacity market, for example, they will be valued at a lower value because they're non-dispatchable.
Mhm.
But they do produce a lot of the time when they would be needed. And so, yeah, certainly, you know, we think it's really important to have a very diverse portfolio of energy resources to
Mhm.
cover all of those things. But there's a lot of generators that have made claims that they should be compensated quite richly because they are base load and dispatchable, and that have gone down at the worst possible time.
Right.
So a couple of years ago on Labor Day, we had the highest electricity prices we've seen in a long, long time. And that's because combined cycle natural gas plant went down because of a connectivity issue to the grid. And so, you know, even these resources that are supposed to be very reliable sometimes go down when it's very inconvenient and costly.
And the other point here is that battery storage would make these things dispatchable, make solar dispatchable, right? The combination, that the thing that we've all been waiting for, and I know it's economic in nature, but we've been waiting for the price of storage to drop so that we could put a surplus of energy into the batteries and make it a dispatchable resource, right?
Absolutely. So solar or other renewable technologies paired with storage is making it dispatchable. And when I was talking about ramp rate, storage has, you know, is very responsive.
Mhm.
You don't have to fire up turbines or anything like that.
Mhm.
So absolutely, that's storage alone is something that folks are looking more and more into as an important resources, and solar or other renewable technologies paired with storage certainly is something that folks are really excited and will be critical as we do get more and more of the grid that is supplied with renewable technologies that can be intermittent.
For those of you who aren't aware, Green Mountain Power does have a program in their state, in the state of Vermont, which is a vertically owned utility, kind of an interesting study here, but they have a program where you can, for very modest amount of money, I think it's $10 a month, put a Tesla Powerwall in your home. And the only stipulation they have is that when peak power is in demand, they can pull from those batteries and help offset the cost of purchasing from the grid. And they've issued press releases that are significant in the savings they've made from this. Now, I understand, Madeline, that state of New Hampshire, we have Liberty Utilities at least, who is experimenting with that same idea. Is that correct?
Yep, Liberty has a pilot, and it's a little bit of a different approach than what Green Mountain Power did because they're pairing their batteries with a time of use rate, which is actually even more innovative and sort of giving an economic opportunity for customers to manipulate their demand to shift a lot of their use away from those peak demand times to create additional savings. And Eversource and Unitil are also starting to pilot bring your own device programs in the efficiency programs. And so, as I mentioned, one of the other really exciting programs in the plan that's before the commission is to bring those small pilots into full programs. So we are looking more and more at having batteries deployed that can be called upon to act in a demand response or reducing peak demand events.
And part of your discussion about the community power program would be, among other things, the thought of doing innovative programs like this, like the one done in Vermont, so that we can benefit from this ourselves individually, I would guess, right?
That's right. When community power programs look at potentially procuring electricity for their own community, if they change the customer behavior and the load profile of the energy use in their community, either by using efficiency or demand response programs, battery programs, and there's less peak demand in their whole profile, they, in theory, can now get even better priced electricity because they can show to those suppliers, look, we really know how to manage our demand, and we don't, we're not going to cost you a lot during peak demand events.
That's correct. Demand management is the key. 80% of the cost associated with electricity distribution is correlated to the 20% that's needed during peak. You have to build for the peak, otherwise it'll fail. Yeah. Well, Madeline, I want to thank you very much. We're at the top of the hour. We planned it for an hour, and I could talk about this forever. I'm the chair of my local energy committee myself, and as you know, quite involved with this whole effort. I want to thank you for being with us. Very interesting. We've had a lot of people come to this today, and we can't do enough to educate. I think education of these issues is key. And for those of you who feel compelled, please reach out to your legislators and try to help us nudge this thing in the right direction. I personally am just embarrassed to see the numbers of us as a state compared to our neighbors with respect to solar. It's fundamentally embarrassing. It's something we need to do much better on. So thank you for being here with us. For those of you listening, this has been recorded, and you should, if we're lucky, if technology works, you will get an email with a link to the recording that you can share with others. Again, Madeline, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.